So as you can see here, this is the back of the painting by Matthias Read, and it is painted on wooden panels. This is quite interesting because you can see all of the panel joins here, here, here and here. So you can count the number of planks it was made from. You can also see at the very edges where it had been attached to a frame before by nailing through the edges of the painting, which obviously isn't a very good idea because the wooden panels want to move and will expand and contract naturally, and that would force them into a position where they couldn't move at all, and then that sets up tensions and then can also start causing cracking and the panel joins to start to fail. In this instance, it's the panels are very roughly sawn, although during the last restoration process, we're not quite sure when that was, the joins in the panels seem to have been planed down slightly to get a better join. So areas like that, you can see there, appear very, very clean looking compared to an area like this that has probably more than 200 years worth of dirt on there. Also on this, there is a panel repair in the top left corner of the painting when you're viewing it from the front, but obviously on the reverse it's the top right. And these small blocks, which tend to be called butterflies, because usually they're more of a butterfly shape, they've been inserted into the either side of the panel join and fixed there with I think it's like an epoxy filler to try and stop the movement of the panel. It obviously came apart at that point, and that was the method of fixing it. That looks reasonably new. I would expect that to have been done about within the last 30 years, certainly. But at this stage, it's okay, and there was no point in reversing that at the moment. We could reverse that in the future if something went wrong and it started to fail again. But at this point in time, we were more concerned about keeping the structure as it was and protecting it from the environment. The other thing that the panel does have, and the frame also had, was woodworm. It was old woodworm, as far as we know, but we did treat the panel with a woodworm killer just to be on the safe side. We didn't come across any frass, which is the little sort of light powdery substance you can see near holes when woodworm is fresh, and it's quite difficult to see, but there are some here, some just little woodworm holes here, just down there. Once that was done, the other thing that we have done before putting it in the frame is we put on a conservation resin that we've made up into almost like a varnish, which is called Paraloid B72, and it is quite a good moisture barrier. And in this case, because the panels themselves are so thin, we decided that will be a good thing to do at this point. The panels vary because they've been roughly cut, but at their narrowest, at the very edges where it has been chamfered away, it's been beveled, it's about 1/4 of an inch. So for something this age, that's quite unusual. So Matthias Read at the time was obviously just looking around for what he could find, and obviously quite thin wood at the time was what he'd used. So before putting it in the frame, we have added to this frame a slip, which we padded with 2mm plastazote, attached with an acrylic acid-free adhesive, which makes it quite easy to apply, and it cushions the painting when it sits against it, so it also helps cut down on vibration as well. In this case, we've sat it on softwood blocks, which also have the plastazote, just cushioning the bottom edge of the painting, and then we've just hand-carved plastazote blocks just to sit around the panel as well. If the panel wanted to move, it still can, but that just helps position it so it's not going to wobble around and move in the frame itself. The brass framing strips have been bent to try and secure the painting but not really force it flat. And these have also got the plasters out on the underside where it is touching the back of the painting. Once the backing board goes on, the backing board is also covered in Melanex film, which acts as a bit of a moisture and dust barrier, as you can see here, so that goes in the frame, and then we're just taping it up with gum strip. That will help create a mini environment. It's not a sealed environment, but it helps buffer the changes that the painting will feel if the atmosphere outside of the frame changes. The rate of change within the frame will be a lot slower. Always have a pot to put them in. It helps you keep them together and not lose them. I've learnt that through experience. Of course, this becomes very repetitive. So in this case, because we've already bent the plates, the tension should be okay, but normally we, as we go and as we frame up, we bend these with a pair of pliers to a position where they sit on the back, but they're not applying just the right amount of tension rather than too much. You just go either side of the table and then just lift it into the top corners and make sure that it's positioned right. There's an A here and a corresponding one on the board, so that's fine. And then all we do is go around putting cups on and the right size screws. So we'll do that. From the front of the painting you can see that it's now got low reflective glazing, which works incredibly well if you can alter the direction of the light that falls onto it. In order to fit the glazing into the frame, here we have provided a new slip which keeps the glass away from the paint surface, and then that's padded with plasterzote, so the painting is sitting against the plasterzote as a cushioning layer rather than the wooden slip. From the front, you can see that some of the joins in the painting, some of the panel joins, are visible, particularly here, up there in the cloud, and that's because there's a slight step in the way that the panels have aged, and one of them has slightly distorted. When it was last restored, whenever that was, the restorer has filled that gap and then put some retouching over the top to disguise it. The other panel joins further down are less obvious. One of the things that we did as part of the conservation process this time was we did, or my colleague did retouch or in-paint some of the knots which had started to show through into the paint layer, just to disguise some of those ever so slightly, because some of them before were very, very visible. So she's just spotted tiny little imperfections where we know there are knots on the surface. They probably wouldn't have been visible when the artist painted it originally. But on drying and then through time, oil paint can become more transparent with age. So anything that is there can become more obvious. But on the whole, the painting was in quite a good condition. So we didn't clean it. We have left the varnish on, which it did have. We have put a very light, modern synthetic varnish over the top of that, just to dull the surface slightly and to give it more of a semi-matte appearance rather than a very glossy appearance, which is quite a large area. And Janice has retouched some parts of that just to give it more of an even look. It is slightly mottled, but it's better than it was before, and actually to completely remove that would mean an awful lot of work, and then you're kind of disguising part of the way that it's aged as well, which, you know, we thought that it was probably better to have it reasonably even but with those things showing, rather than it looking very flat and very clean looking when in fact it is almost 300 years old.
This has been, we believe, in the same house for 300 years. So to move from the house by Bassenthwaite to the auction house and in Cockermouth and then to here is probably its biggest move in its lifetime.
Who owned the picture originally?
It was the family that owned it. So the man in the picture, it would have stayed in his family home for all those 300 years, and then it was for sale.
Which is quite good going, really.
Yeah. So I guess going from what might have been a house with an open fire, perhaps, well, it would have been, wouldn't it, for a lot of that time, which would have been a damper kind of environment, and then to come into this room, which might have been a more, I guess, a drier atmosphere. I guess that's maybe why.
I mean, it is interesting that, I mean, one of the things that might have influenced it as well is that it has been restored. The panels have been re-glued. You know, a thin layer of the wood has been shaved off the joints, so that's kind of exposing fresh wood that's going to go, oh, hello, great, you know, all right. It's not the same as the dirty, darker, very crusty looking bit of wood in this corner. So, you know, even something that old, if you then start to plane and shave it, it's going to go, oh wow, you know, where am I, almost, and start reacting to the environment. So it can, you know, that's the thing with things on panel, wooden panel, that they can that they remain quite sensitive, you know, no matter what age they are.